least a minute, minute and a half to get to the podium. And then that'd give me about 50 seconds to talk and 10 minutes to get back to my chair. So I'll keep it right around 7, just not to bore you. I remember when we moved down, we came from the big city of Flagstaff. We moved down here, and I had 2 little girls. And we walked into church for the first time into this building, and who did we meet but Locy at the door? And Locy was full of smiles. You guys all know how Locy was. He was just happy. He was so upbeat. He made it worth coming to church that day. And from that point on, and we had 3 children after that, Locy was my kids' favorite person. When they heard we got to go to Locy's house, for one, we knew we were going to go and find a 300-pound squash or a 40-foot tall piece of cornstalk. For some reason, he had more than a golden or a green thumb. He had an amazing thumb. When I moved down here, we opened up a cabinet shop. And back then, we were this little 1-horse town, and we didn't have anywhere else to go but to the lumber store. So we'd go down and we'd get our stuff down at the lumber place. And there was one person you always asked for when you went in there, and it was, where's Locy at? Because Locy was the one guy that knew where everything in that lumber place was. And he would come from nowhere. He'd come out from the back 40 back there, and he would cut your board for you, or he'd help you find the piece of plywood you needed. And so he was, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but he was the only one that worked there. Okay? So that's why I always ask for Locy. As Locy was going along through life, I don't know what we did or why Locy liked us, but he'd call me up and he'd say, hey, Scott, are you going to be at home? And I'd say, well, no, but I can meet you there. What you got? He says, I got a little surprise for you. And so I'd show up down at the house, and Locy would pull up, and he had built us a little wishing well, and it stands about that tall. And to this day, it sits over the top of my wellhead. And we look out there, and it's got the little crank and the little hook. And that's what Locy built for my kids. And my kids have always loved it ever since then. Not only did he build us that, but we were so blessed to get one of these. I don't know how many of y'all have one of these, but Locy brought this over, and he says, I'm known as the naughty sign guy. And he says, that's the naughtiest I'll ever get. And so we had it hanging up at our house for a long time, and I finally said, you know what, this is kind of a precious memory. So we took it down and we brought it back inside just so that I can preserve it for later on. And one of my kids will end up with it, depending on who's the best when I do. I'd be sitting in my office and I'd be working, and all of a sudden I'd look up, here comes Locy through the door. And Locy would just stop by in the middle of the day just to check on you, just to see how you were. How are things going, Scott? How's the family? When I haven't come to church, this was Locy's way of getting me back into the church. This by saying, hey, Scott, would you please talk? And Locy was one of those kind of guys that even when I wasn't coming to church, he would call me up and say, hey, Scott, there's a fireside at the church. We'd love to have you and Michelle come. And he was always watching out for me, always watching out for our family. And then when we would say, hey, guys, come on, climb in the car. We're going over to Locy's house. We're going to go over and look at his garden. He wanted us to come by. He's got garlic or a squash or, onions or whatever it might have been to give away. The kids were always excited to go, and Locy would spend hours out there just showing everything, showing how he watered it, how he fertilized it. He was trying to teach Michelle how to be a gardener. She just doesn't have a husband that'll make her a garden. To this day, it always sticks in my mind that if Jesus was walking the earth, he came in the form of Locy Rogers. because he was the kindest, most gentlest, would give you anything, give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. And that's always the way that I look at Locy. And one of these days, I hope to have that opportunity to tell Locy how I feel. And I look forward to the day of meeting. In fact, my dad and him are probably up there high-fiving each other right now, going, "Good job, Locy, you got him back in the church." And so, but Locy left a big impression on us. We loved him dearly. I'm like the bishop. I want to tell Linda what a great individual she is, and how important it was to have a family member there to give him that help and everything that she did. Because I saw my mother-in-law go through this, and how it wore her down. But she was right there, and that's the way Linda was. And so you need to be commended for that. But I'll leave that with all of you, and do that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Good afternoon. About 9 months before Locy passed away, he brought a poem to Mac and I. He said he loved this poem, and he would like us to set it to music. And when he passed, he would like us to play it for him. So that's what we're doing today. And we truly hope that you can enjoy it, and above all, that Locy can enjoy it. I have no doubt that he is here overseeing this congregation and listening to what is being said in his honor. So we'll do our best to do our best. Oops, that wasn't part of it. There's a wonderful place where I'm longing to roam, where my journey alone is complete, where the sun always shines and the troubles grow dim, with a peace and contentment so sweet. That graciously shown me the way to come home, and I know if I follow the path he has marked, there will be as his own one day. There'll be dear ones and friends who have gone on before. I will be with the Lord.
1 year ago this morning, hope I get through this, we buried our father. That's kind of why we're having this today, is because today is the 1 year anniversary of that. It's not how he would have wanted it to be. And everything that's happening today, he planned, except for the song we're going to hear after I finish. So it wasn't me asking Scott and Michelle to talk. It was Dad asking Scott and Michelle to talk at his funeral. It was Dad asking Mac and Patsy to sing that song. It was Dad asking Brother and Sister Reed to give the prayers, Mamie to play the organ, Charlotte to lead the music. And I told him I got to give his life story. When we buried Dad, like Bishop said, we were limited to only 10 people at the cemetery. He wanted to have a big funeral with a viewing. He wanted everybody to come together one last time to see him. But because of COVID, we couldn't do that. We did what we could, and so today we're trying to make up for it. And I want to thank everyone who's here physically, and I would like to thank everyone who is tuned in electronically via technology. Today I'll share a few of the stories. It was hard to cut them down to be something that we could sit through. There's hundreds of stories. A few years ago, him and I would sit when I would get off work, and he would tell me stories, and I would type them on the computer. We had well over 100 pages. I'm still working on them, editing, adding pictures, and posting them on Family Search where they're available for everybody to see, and they'll always be there. Locy Marias Rogers was born on Sunday, February 24th, 1929, at 10:25 p.m. at home on the ranch in Joseph City, Arizona, to George Thomas Rogers and Mamie Teresa Porter Rogers. His mother's sister, Aunt Ethel Westover, was the wife or midwife, nurse that helped with the birth. His name is significant. I know most of you have probably never heard most of his name. His first name, Locy, is after a man named Andrew Locy Rogers, who is also known as Uncle Locy or Honest Locy up in the Snowflake area. And he always said, and Grandma told him, Grandma had a dream about this man whom she knew when she was pregnant with Dad. And she said, this baby's going to be named Locy. And so he got that name. His middle name, just a note there, all of his life, he was told and believed that he was not related to this man, Andrew Locy Rogers. I looked it up a few months before he died. We are, but you got to go 10 generations to find a common ancestor. And it's through his mother's Porter line. It's not through our Rogers line. His middle name is Marias, and it was after his maternal grandfather. His name is Sanford Marias Porter. He went by Marias, he didn't go by Sanford, and I think it's because his father and his grandfathers, both their names were Sanford, and they went by Sanford. And of course, his last name is from his father. And Dad said he always felt a responsibility to live up to the wonderful example of these men that he was named after. Dad has 5 older brothers, George, William, Clem, Roland, and Ben, and 1 younger brother, Lynn. He has 6 older sisters, Eva, Maddie, Maud, Ruth, Elsie, and Ada, and 1 younger sister, Pearl. And all of those people had passed before he did. He was the last one. He was an uncle to 7 nieces and nephews before he was born. The youngest of those 7 is here with us today and was actually 24 days older than Dad. And he became an uncle 53 more times after he was born. Growing up on the family ranch in Joseph City, he learned an excellent work ethic, which he passed on to his children. On the ranch, they grew alfalfa, corn, and vegetables. They raised cows, hogs, turkeys, and chickens, and farming was done with a team of horses. There was never any, well, I think after they sold the house and the ranch, there was electricity and running water, but when he was living there, there was never electricity or running water in the house. He said he was excited to start school when he was little, when he was 6. He said he was always excited, like as if you told a child they were going to have a birthday party. But he was never a very good student, and he had to repeat the 1st grade. He attended 1st through 10th grade in Joseph City, and he completed 1 more year in Holbrook, and then he gave up. He quit. But this is also the year that his mother died. I remember when I was little, Dad sitting at the kitchen table with all the school books spread out. He was trying to get his GED. But he would be asleep because he'd worked a long, hard day. And he said he took the GED class a couple of times, but he never could pass enough subjects. I think it may be the only thing he ever gave up on in his life. Dad learned to drive really young. His parents never did drive an automobile. They only ever went in a horse and buggy. When he was about 13 or 14 years old, all of his older brothers and sisters were either gone married or off in the service or at school. And so his dad went out to the highway and flagged down a policeman and told him the situation, that they needed to have some transportation. He was the only one left. So the police officer said, "We'll try to leave him alone, but if he gets in trouble or in a wreck, we're going to have to treat him what he is, a too young driver." He said, "I never got in any trouble. Lucky me." Dad was really proud that when he finally got old enough, he did get a driver's license, and he had his driver's license until he was 90. He didn't drive the last couple of years. I wouldn't let him. No, I would let him. I told him one day, he asked me, "Can I drive the truck?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's your truck. Will you go with me?" Nope. But I took him where he needed to go. He said that people were always dying on his birthday. His Aunt Emma Ethel Westover, who helped deliver him, died on his 6th birthday. His sister Elsie died on his 10th birthday. The one that probably affected him the most, his mother died the day before his 18th birthday. And was buried the day after. His sister Maddie died 2 days after his 33rd birthday, and his brother Ben died 4 days after his 74th birthday. So I don't think they celebrated birthdays a lot. And after I moved up here, I made sure we celebrated birthdays every year. He loved it. After he left school, he worked at Bushman's Dairy for a short time, and then he went up to Newcastle, Utah, and Pioche, Nevada, and worked with his brother William for maybe about a year, and that's the only time he didn't live in Arizona his whole life. When he came back from Utah and Nevada, he had to re-register. Congress had passed a resolution that you had to re-register for the draft. This was probably about 1940s, sometime early 40s. And so he went and got re-registered, and they sent him to Phoenix for a physical. So this is Dad's military story. So he did the whole physical, and he said it was in a big hall. And at the end of that, there were some doctors over in the corner, and they were all telling him, come over here. So he went over, and they sent him to a specialist a few blocks away. And the specialist felt of the birthmark on his face and said he didn't know how to take it off except by doing plastic surgery. And they would have to cut down his forehead, around his eye, down his nose, and around his mouth, and stretch the skin, and just keep doing that several times until it was gone. And so he went home and talked to Grandpa, and Grandpa said, well, does it bother you? Dad said, no. He says, we ain't got money for that kind of stuff. A few weeks later came in the mail a letter that they had excused him from military service, classified 4F, serious scar on face. It wasn't a scar, it was just his birthmark. But he said he was glad because he didn't have to serve. He didn't really want to, but he didn't want to get in trouble either. After that, he worked for a season at Merrill Farms in Chandler Heights, irrigating. And then he went to work for a cotton gin. It's called Producers Cotton and Oil Gin in Queen Creek. And he said he worked there for about 5 seasons. And during that time, he worked all the different jobs in the cotton gin except the office, he would say. And he said that was before OSHA, so no mask. And so while you're working, your nose would get so full of cotton dust that you talked funny. About this time, he decided he needed something more steady, more year-round kind of work. And he found a job at the Gilbert School District. He was a bus driver and janitor. He said he picked up all the kids from 1st to 12th grades, and he drove the same route all 4 years that he worked for him. And half of the year, the route would go one way, and the other half, it would go the other way, so that the kids that got picked up first got picked up last the other half of the year. While he was working for the Gilbert School District is when he met and married our mother, Evelyn Manning. They lived in Mesa in a small home near the temple for a couple of months, and then he found out about a job up here, and so they decided to move up here, and he went to work for Clarkdale High School. And that was the last year that the high school was held in the Clarkdale building, which is now the Copper Museum in Clarkdale. He said the next summer they renovated the school building up in Jerome, and for the next 5 or 6 years, he would drive 2 loads up in the morning and 2 loads back down in the afternoon. And his route would start out at the Cornville, out by the Cornville, where the Cornville School is today, up to Jerome and back. He said he clocked it one time and drove 101 miles that day, delivering kids. That first year when the high school was still in Clarkdale, he picked up all the kids from Jerome, grade school, high school, junior high, and brought them down the hill. Him and Mom got married in 1959, and they had 6 children, 5 of whom they were able to raise to adulthood. These children added to the family and gave them 4 daughters-in-laws and 1 son-in-law. They currently have 12 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, 4 grandchildren-in-laws, soon to be 2 more, and 10 great-grandchildren. Evelyn passed in 2008. This is the part he was sad about. 11 days short of their 49th anniversary. Shortly after they were married, then they came up here. After he left the school, he worked for the Clarkdale Laundry for about 5 years. He would help load the big laundry, the washing machines, and he delivered laundry and picked up the soil to almost every restaurant, bar, and gas station, motel in the whole Verde Valley. It's interesting because a few years ago, we were at Fry's one day, and he didn't want to go in, so he was sitting on a little bench right in the front of Fry's. And when I came out, there was a man sitting there, and they were chatting. That didn't surprise me. Dad talked to everybody. The thing that surprised me was I asked the man how he knew Dad, and he said his family had lived in Camp Verde, and Dad had delivered linens to the gas station his family owned when he was a kid. I was like, people knew him. After about 5 years, he could see that their business was kind of going down. I think that's when all the motels and restaurants were putting in their own washers and dryers. And so he went to Babbitt's, and like you heard Scott, everybody knew him at Babbitt's. He was at Babbitt's for about 27 years. Mostly he was in customer service, the person out in the yard that would help you load whatever you bought. He also drove the forklift, and he went to Phoenix for several years, weekly, sometimes twice a week, to pick up special orders. And he was always proud that he could make 20 or 25 stops in a day to pick stuff up. And the last few years, he was the gate guard. So you go in and get your stuff and pull out, he would check. And he said, and he would count. There was one time somebody had one too many, and he'd take it out. Or if they were one or two short, he'd tell them go back and get the rest of it. Many of you know that our father kept and worked honeybees. I'm not exactly sure. I remember when we got the bees, I think it was in the early 70s. Someone had told our parents that if we would eat local honey, it would help George with his asthma. And so they did what they needed to do. He arranged and bought 3 hives of bees, and I think that first year he lost at least one. I know he lost at least one. It may have been 2. It took him a long time to learn how to do bees, but he finally learned how to do bees. And then he would help people with bees, and he loved to be able to talk to people about bees. And he would give presentations everywhere. I recently found a whole envelope, big envelope, full of thank you notes from a school class that he had been to. He even bought a really nice set of bee pictures that are all laminated and everything so that he could take and share with people as he taught about bees. And he enjoyed when people would take his picture or when he got wrote up in the paper for working with the bees. I have another bee story in a little bit. But I want to move on to tell you about music. My dad loved music. One of the brothers reminded me, shared a story, which I'll share in a little bit too. He loved to watch Lawrence Welk and Hee Haw. A few years ago, when he usually listened to the Calm radio station in the car, at least the last few years. I bought a Lawrence Welk CD because Lawrence Welk was his favorite. And we would put it in the car so that when we were out of town, out of range of the radio station, we could listen to it. A few years ago, we went up to Nevada to see Mark. And I took a couple other CDs in the car so we could switch off. One of the CDs that I remember taking was a big band swing. Lawrence Welk, big band. Same, should be great, right? Nope. He didn't say it was bad. He didn't want to change it, but he got agitated in the car. Wasn't like violent or anything. He was just not his normal calm self. I finally took the swing tape out and I put the Lawrence Welk tape back in. He calmed right down. I never ever tried to put another tape in the car after that. They had a pump organ at home when he was growing up. And I don't know how much he learned to play it, but I think he learned to play a little bit. And sometime when I was a teenager, that pump organ got wound up at my Aunt Ada's house down in Mesa. And anytime we would go visit, he'd have to go in and get on the pump organ and play this one little tune that he remembered. Wasn't very long, but it was the same one every time. He knew that tune. He played the trombone in the high school band. And they got to go to El Paso for a New Year's parade. And he said it was cold, and the slide froze on the trombone. He was able to get it broke loose and finish the parade, and then they got back in the bus, and his knuckles started stinging, and he couldn't figure out why. He looked down, and he had skinned his fingers as he had broke that slide loose and went past the bell on the trombone. The songs for today. Dad didn't want to have sad songs at his funeral. So you'll notice the song we sang in the beginning and the song we'll sing at the end are kind of upbeat songs, but they totally are my dad. The song that Mac and Patsy just did, we've heard several times. Del Smith is a friend from Joe's City. Del Smith wrote this poem. And Del sings it with the guitar at funerals up there periodically, and we've heard it several times when we've gone up to Joe's City for funerals. So Dad asked him, when the last one, I don't know, 3 years ago, if he could have the words, if he could have the music. And Del said, there isn't any music. It's just a poem that he had written. But he sent Dad a copy of the words, and that's when, like Patsy said, we asked them if they would put it to music and sing it today. And he would have loved that. It was beautiful. The day Dad died, the song Red River Valley kept running through my head. And on that day, I sat down and rewrote some of the words for that song, and that's what we're going to listen to after I finish. And so as a family, we recorded it on Marco Polo, and my brother Dustin, I don't know what you call it, put all the pieces together and made it like a choir. It turned out really well. About the garden that Scott talked about, I don't remember ever not having a garden in our, there were a few years it wasn't in our yard because we didn't have land or water. And Mom and Dad find somebody to share crop with, and we go water and pull weeds and plant and everything else. And those people, we did it at their house, would get some vegetables, and we got vegetables. And for those of you who would like, Dad saved seeds. There's some tatsoi seeds out on the tables if you'd like to take some home. Dad loved growing a garden. Dad loved having fruits and vegetables from our yard that he could share with everybody. He grew lots of different vegetables. He would grow vegetables for my mom. Dad doesn't like okra. My mom did. So he would grow okra for my mom. He did find out that melons just don't do very good at our house. So he quit trying to grow those. After he retired, until the last few years, he would spend hours out in his garden. And part of it, I think, is so he could see people walking or driving by, and he'd stop and chat with them. And if you were lucky enough to walk or drive by when he was out in the garden, he'd invite you in for a tour. If there was anything ripe, he'd pick it and give it to you. I'll share with you a couple days ago, a lady called from APS. They're going to replace an electric pole on our property, and she was just warning me we're going to have a power outage. And she said, "Is this Locy Rogers' house?" And I said, "Well, it's Locy, and yes." "How's he doing?" I said, "I'm sorry, he passed away a year ago. We're going to have his service on Saturday." And she hadn't heard, but she said, "I remember him. He used to go in and pay the bill. He knew all the people behind the counters, every place to pay the bill." And she said, he used to bring us vegetables out of the garden when he would come pay the bill. And he did. And like Scott showed you, the not sign, Dad loved to do crafts. I don't know if loved. After he retired, he did crafts a lot. I remember him putting together the little plastic models that you used to buy kits in the store. Probably still can. I don't know. I haven't looked for them for years. He made walking sticks for a few years. He made the knot signs for a few years. He would dry his 4 o'clock flowers and make bookmarks for a few years. Just lots. I think those were things that just kind of kept him busy. Another thing that kept him busy after my mom died was going up and spending time at the cemetery with the weed eater or with the loppers, cutting down weeds and things. And he spent hours up there. I'm going to switch here a little bit. I asked my siblings each for a memory. And so I'm going to share some of the memories that they had. Mark said, as a young boy, we had chores. We did. Mom and Dad believed in chores. We had to take care of rabbits and chickens and other animals that we mostly raised for food. And Mark said he remembered they all tasted good. My mom was a great cook. Mark remembered being asked to help with the bees. He didn't like working the bees. I don't think anybody except me liked working the bees with Dad. They'd all stay in the house when we extracted, and they'd run the extractor, and I was perfectly happy with that because I didn't want to do the extractor. I wanted to be out in the beehives with Dad. Mark also said that Dad was an amazing role model. He didn't see it when he was little, but he's glad for it now as he's a grown man and a father himself. I wasn't going to put this part in, but somebody else said it, and so I had to put it back in. Mark said one of the last memories that he has of Dad is almost 2 years ago. We went to St. George and picked Mark up to drive up to Idaho for his youngest son's mission farewell. And he remembers hearing family stories in the car. I was grateful for Mark on that trip to help with Dad. Mark was driving on the way home and kind of was going a little fast and got pulled over. And he says the car in front of me was going just as fast, and that car got to just keep going. So he was going to argue with the officer, and Dad told him to respect the officer for keeping us safe. So Mark did. He still got a ticket, but Dad did teach us to be respectful. My sister Sandra said it was fun. Dad taught her how to drive. Mom taught the 3 older of us how to drive, and I guess when it came time for Sandy, Mom told him, I've taught 3 of them. This one's yours. And Sandy thought they were doing great until she rode with Mom one day, and then Mom went home and told Dad he wasn't doing a very good job. Sandy was driving with 1 foot on the brake and 1 foot on the gas. So Dad said he'd watch a little more closely after that, and she said, I guess he did okay. I got my license. Dustin talked about Dad loving music. He remembered the stories that Dad used to tell about being in the high school band, playing the trombone. Dustin also remembered that Dad wired our whole house inside and out so that he could play the radio. So we always had music. Dustin said that every Saturday morning the house was filled with music. Classic, country, sweet soul music, big band jazz, every song you know, from Johnny Cash to Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, and the Oak Ridge Boys. He loved shows like Hee Haw and Lawrence Welk. From all of this, I learned how to love. His musical appreciation affected his creativity and love for everyone and everything in his life. Dustin's wife, Christy, said, when I learned that Locy had kept bees for years, I was fascinated. I'd ask him questions, and everyone knows Locy loved to talk about bees. I remember being amazed that he didn't wear a full suit that I imagined thinking of that a beekeeper would wear. He just wore a hat and a veil. I asked him one day, I can't believe you don't get stung. He replied, Oh, I get stung, but you have to know how to handle them. He went on to explain, I'm going into their home. Their instinct is to protect against an intruder. You have to treat them with respect. There comes the respect again. Just like people, and I'm sure most of you have heard him say this, if I came into your home and was rude, pushing and shoving you around, you are going to fight back and protect yourself. But just like people, if you are kind and patient, they will move. They are more than willing to help you. You have to be calm and gentle and move slowly and carefully, and they don't see you as a threat to attack. Accidents happen, but just like people, if you're respectful, kind, and gentle, you won't have as many problems. I think about this conversation often, she said. Anyone who knew Locy knows that this is how he approached everyone he encountered, with kindness, patience, and respect. Some of you may not know, I'm back to my stories now. Dad loved cookies. Mostly he loved my mom's cookies. And we always had a big green Tupperware bowl on top of the fridge that always had cookies in it, until my mom couldn't make cookies anymore towards the end of her life. When she couldn't make any more, he'd go to the store and he'd buy packages of cookies, and he still put them in the green bowl on top of the fridge. The year after Mom died, he wanted to make cookies to give to people at Christmas. I was not living here then. I'd only come up on a weekend, and there wasn't enough time to do everything else and make cookies. So I took him to the store and showed him the refrigerated cookie dough. You just break off the little squares and bake them. He loved that. And every time after that, when I came home, there were 1 or 2 packages of cookie dough in the fridge. Always. And he would just make 1 package at a time, put them in the green cookie bowl, and when they were gone, he'd make another one. And he learned he liked them soft, and he'd say, you have to cook them for the lowest amount of time or 1 minute less, or else they get too hard. One of the other things he liked the last few years is one year for Christmas, one of the kids gave him a digital camera. It was just a simple point and shoot, and I think it was George, I don't remember. He loved that camera. He took 1 million pictures of everything. And I would come home and I would have to load all the pictures off of the camera onto the computer. And then I set up the computer so that the screensaver was just those pictures scrolling through. That was better than television. He would sit for hours and watch those pictures. I lived with Dad for the last 9 years of his life, and the first few I didn't take care of him. He was good, but the last few I did. And I was always amazed at how many people he talked to everywhere. I was also amazed at how many people would stop him when we were at a store and want to chat for a couple minutes. And I started finally asking these people, how do you know Dad? I don't know who you are. And so they would tell me. And he drove my bus, or he delivered laundry, or I'm doing from the lumber yard, or he got bees out of my yard, or I don't know. There were so many stories. One of the things I used to get a kick out of was watching him. As we'd walk down the sidewalk or walk in a store, he'd say hello to everyone. It didn't matter if he knew them. The thing I got a kick out of was watching people almost get whiplash. You talking to me? Yeah, Dad was talking to everybody. I don't think he ever saw strangers or people who he did not know. He only saw people he hadn't talked to. But I have to tell you, I don't remember Dad always being so outgoing. I think it mostly started when I was, I think, an early teen. So this would have probably been in the early 1970s. I don't know when it was. Here at church, we were still down in the building on Mingus. It's Westcott Mortuary today. They asked my mom and dad to be the greeters at the door for 1 month, just for 1 month. And that meant that they had to come a little early and shake everyone's hand and greet them, welcome them to church. Okay, so for that month, we came a little early, and they stood out in the foyer and they greeted everyone. And when that month was over, my mom would come in and sit down, and she'd sit kind of on a row and save the seat on the aisle. My dad never stopped doing that for the rest of his life. The last few years, as he got harder for him to stand, he moved out of the foyer and by the door jamb so he could lean up against the door jamb to be steady. And then when he got to where he couldn't stand and he was in the wheelchair, I'd park his wheelchair back there by the back door so that he could still shake everyone's hand and welcome them to church. Everybody knew my dad. One of the stories about that, and even all the children knew to shake his hand. They would come and stand until he saw them and would shake their hand. There was one little girl that, it's been a couple of years ago now, would come with her grandma. She was probably about 7 or 8 years old. She wouldn't shake Dad's hand. She didn't know him. And every week, Grandma would encourage her to shake Dad's hand, and every week she was hiding behind Grandma's skirts. Dad never pressed her, would say hi or wave at her, but he didn't ever press her. It took a few months, but pretty soon she was coming in and shaking Dad's hand just like all the rest of the kids. They became friends. The last few years, maybe 4 or 5, Dad got figured out that we could do Christmas cards with his picture on it. He wouldn't ever put anybody's names on the envelopes. I thought he should just address them, and hand them out to who he was on his list. He wouldn't, because he wanted to be able to give a Christmas card to anybody he saw and felt like they needed a Christmas card. He didn't want to have to go find, and remember them later. So envelopes never got names on them. He just handed cards to everybody. And people that he wouldn't see, he would make a list. And we'd cross names off the list, and then there'd still be people that he hadn't found, he hadn't encountered. He'd carry a handful of cards the entire month of December and hand out cards. Then we'd drive to people's houses. Cards got delivered in person. The first year, he didn't want very many. I finally convinced him to order 25. That may have been the minimum. I think he gave them away in a week or 2. So we ordered more, and we ordered a third time. The second year, I wouldn't let him start with less than 100. But that made his Christmas, being able to hand out Christmas cards to everyone. He did mail a few, but not very many. About 4 to 6 years ago, Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I think he'd been having trouble for a few years caused by that, but it took a really long time to diagnose because he didn't have the tremors in his hands like most people that we think about having Parkinson's. I think his balance was the first thing to go. One day he complained about the balance issue when we were at the cardiologist's office, and I said, Dad, he's a cardiologist, he's a heart doctor. But the cardiologist was grand, and he said, come out here in the hall. And he had Dad walk down the hall with his fingertips on the wall. And he said, you need a walking stick. And Dad said, don't I need a cane? The doctor said, nah, canes are for old people. Walking sticks are cool. So after that appointment, I took Dad to the Walmart to get a walking stick. And we got him a real nice one that collapses, and telescopes out. He didn't like it. He wouldn't use it. He didn't think it was sturdy enough. So he took himself out to the wash by our house, and he cut himself a piece of bamboo, and he put a crutch tip on it and put a rope through the top of it for a handle, and that's what he used. He decorated, got a black marker, and he drew pictures. He loved that walking stick. That walking stick fell when he was getting in or out of the truck one day and got crushed as the door went shut. He put duct tape around it, and he used it for quite a while still after that. But every time he'd put it down, I could hear it crackle, and I finally made him give it up. It's still at the house. We didn't throw it away. But he went and got another one. Then he got 2 mop handles and took the mops off and put crutch tips on the bottom. They were metal. They didn't get damaged. They could withstand a lot more stuff. Brother Reed, who gave the opening prayer, made him this most beautiful walking stick. It was he got a piece of wood while he was up in Alaska. It's Alaskan diamond willow. It's gorgeous. Has Dad's name on it, has a bee on it. Dad would only use it when we came to church because he said it was too fancy. He used his 2 metal poles all the time. Finally, about a year and a half, it was over a year and a half before Dad died, I knew we needed some help. And so I called hospice, and they came and said they didn't know if he'd qualify, but they came back the next day and signed him up. Dad was on hospice for 1 year and 7 months. I just want to put a plug in for hospice. If you have an older parent, put them on hospice before the last week of their life. Let them have quality. We love our mom and dad. We miss them being here physically with us. We know where they're at. We know what they're doing. And I'm going to tell you, they're busy. They're still helping people. They're still talking to people. They're still visiting with people, just like they did when they were alive. I know they're watching out for all of us. Again, thanks to everyone who came. Thanks to everyone who was Dad's friend. Thanks to everyone who talked to him and made him happy. Someday we're all going to see him again. He's going to shake our hand, give us a hug. We'll get to hear him chuckle again. And maybe we'll even get to hear some more of his stories. Thank you all so much. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
We will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile, for they say you have taken the sunshine that brightened our pathway across. We've been thinking a long time, dear Locy, of the sweet words you always would say. Now alas, who will welcome us humbly? For they say you have gone far away. Come and sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu. Just remember the great Verde Valley and the people who love you so true. Hear the home you have tended with care. Now you're gone from the great burning valley. We will follow your example with love. On the spirit by my side, if you love me, do not hasten to bid me adieu. Just remember the great burning valley and the people who love you so true.
Thank you. Beautiful song, and thank you for all those who have spoken and provided music. I miss Locy, like all of us, and like Linda said, I can still picture him right in that corner there of the chapel, sitting in his wheelchair, even towards the end, shaking everyone's hand as they came in. To me, handshaking became synonymous with Locy, and that just, when I thought of Locy, I thought of shaking his hand. And a year ago when he passed away, I remember thinking it is ironic and it is fitting that at almost the exact time we lost Locy, the whole world stopped shaking hands. And as the pandemic started, I don't think Locy could have gone without shaking hands. It's just not the same, even to today. So that's one thing I do miss about him and his sweet spirit. Although we will miss him, we do know, like Linda said, we will be reunited peaceful, and he has been reunited peacefully with his wife and his family who have passed on. I can only imagine that joyful reunion that happened. I felt it at the graveside a year ago, and I feel it today. We are all comforted with that knowledge that we will be reunited with him. But in the meantime, we are still here, living. And I think we need to think of Locy and remember his example as we continue to live and apply that example in our lives. As Linda talked a lot about Locy as the Verde Valley Bee Man, I think that's what he was known as the Verde Valley Bee Man. And again, last year, right after he passed, I became closely acquainted with bees myself. My daughter noticed in her shower there was some honey dripping from the ceiling. And upon investigation into the attic above the shower, we found a massive beehive with an abundance of honey. And we had to pull out honeycomb after honeycomb from the attic. And in doing so, I learned more than I ever thought I would about bees and these fascinating insects. And I did think of Locy too. I wish he was still alive and I could ask him more about how to do this and what I could do. Thankfully, the Andersons had a bee suit they let me use. But as I learned about bees, what they can accomplish collectively together is astounding. It's amazing. And Elder Ballard, who's an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, gave a talk about the lesson of the honeybees. And he said, to produce 1 pound of honey, the average hive of 20 to 60,000 bees must collectively visit millions of flowers and travel the equivalent of 2 times around the world. A single bee may produce only 1.5 teaspoons of honey in its whole lifetime. While a single bee's contribution may appear small, it is vital to the production of honey. Work that would be overwhelming for a few bees to do becomes lighter because all the bees faithfully do their part. In the Bible, Hebrews 10:24 says, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. Elder Ballard went on to say, like the honeybees, if we accumulate together with millions of small, compassionate acts of service, Over time, this would have a transformative effect upon all of our Heavenly Father's children through the extension of his love to them through us. Remember that God does notice us and he watches over us, but it's usually through another person that he meets our needs. Therefore, it is vital that we serve each other. Locy, as we all know and as we've heard today, produced much honey, literally and figuratively. He was the prime example of a simple man who consistently provided many small, compassionate acts of service, like Elder Ballard said, until the very end of his life. As I said, he made sure to warmly greet everyone and shake their hand. He taught others. He was always willing to share his knowledge. He shared his garden, like Linda was saying. He was kind and gentle and patient. I specifically remember one day I received a voicemail. It was not too long ago. It was towards the end of Locy's life. As you know, he was frail and he was kind of hard to understand towards the end. But I realized the voicemail was him singing. And he was singing happy birthday to one of my children. And I realized he had gone through the entire list of all the primary children in the ward, and he had called to sing them happy birthday. I'm sure Linda helped him do that. And what a great example of a simple act of good that made a difference. Indeed, Locy's mission in life was to set a good example and try to make people happy. And now after hearing Linda, I know why birthdays were even more important to him. The opening hymn we sang today, Have I Done Any Good in the World Today, was very fitting, and it's something I think we could all think of, and I'm sure Locy thought of every day. And what if each of us lived by that hymn as we woke up and throughout the day? Elder Ballard states that our troubled world needs this love of Christ today more than ever, and it will need it more than ever in the years ahead. These simple daily acts of service may not seem like much in and of themselves, but when considered together collectively, they become just like the 1/12 teaspoon of honey contributed by a single bee in a beehive. There is power in our love for God and for his children, and when that love is tangibly manifest in millions of acts of Locy-like kindness, it will sweeten and nourish the world with the life-sustaining nectar of faith, hope, and charity. I know that if each of us contribute just a fraction of service and love that Locy produced, our world would be a better place. I encourage us all to pray every day to know how we can do so. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. President Hall will provide a few remarks, and then we will close by singing hymn number 228, You Can Make the Pathway Bright, and the benediction will be offered by Locy's friend, Jean Reed. As Linda mentioned, Locy's grave was dedicated by his son, Mark Rogers, exactly 1 year ago today. Locy's grave is in Section E of the Clarkdale Cemetery next to the road between Sections E and H. And feel free to visit anytime. I know some of family and friends will be going to visit later today informally, but we just wanted you to know that. Thank you.
I've only been in the Verde Valley for about 30 years. And some of you have been here longer and gone and come back, and you've known Locy lots longer than I have. I sat by Brother McCoy and visited with him today about his relationship with Locy. The Savior Jesus Christ referred to one of his disciples as the beloved. And I feel that Locy emulated that. He was the beloved. He emulated that in everything that he did, in everything that he said. He knew what had to be done here. He had lived and committed himself to the covenant path. And then what was left? Partaking of the sacrament when he could, and enduring to the end. Brothers and sisters, may we use this life of this man in our toolbox of daily living that will guide us, that will keep us, and then endure to the end is my prayer. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
see that picture of Biden falling down the stairs in the airplane?
No.
I'm surprised he could stand up. He must have done 3 or 4 complete somersaults down the entire steps of the airplane. They said he's done it before.